Hi, welcome to this video accompanying my book on Parkinson's, a guide for carers as they look after someone with that disease that slips gradually into dementia. And that is why the book has been given the title that it's got. Let's first of all grab it off the shelf, arrow pointing accusingly at it just now. And here it comes. Parkinson's, the slippery slope to dementia. You'll see that the author is down as Bill King. I am not Bill King. That is a pseudonym that I've used to protect my wife and our family. Right. So, what I'm going to do is to take a peek at the book itself, chapter by chapter, and that will send you rushing out in large numbers, I hope, to buy a copy. All proceeds to local dementia charities. Okay, in a fit of originality, I've decided to start with chapter 1. The first general point I make is that Parkinson's is a shape-shifting enemy. In other words, it takes on so many different forms, has so many different origins, and the same applies to dementia. You could almost say they're syndromes rather than illnesses, but hey. However, there are a number of things which are in common to all those different variations on Parkinson's and on dementia. Secondly, it appears gradually over time. It sort of sneaks up on you, or on the loved one you're caring for. It doesn't seem too bad at first. It perhaps causes a leg to wobble or an arm to twitch, but it gradually gets worse over time until it becomes quite a problem. And the bad news is there is no magic bullet to, quote, solve Parkinson's disease, or dementia for that matter. The two have so far eluded scientific advances, and the only thing we can do is to make the symptoms as mild as possible in the circumstances. And there's a really tricky problem comes up next, which I'll have a quick word about it before I put up the number on the screen, and that is, as it takes, say, a decade to become really severe and perhaps segue into dementia, you're the carer. As it tends to happen in later life, not only does the loved one get older, you, as the carer, get older. And that is an important factor here. And it's so important that I've got my red marker pen and gone round and said, the carer gets older too. And what I mean by that, one of my famous diagrams will show you. A turn of the page, and there's the diagram. 3 elements, double-headed arrow pointing out the total time in the day, which tends, as you may know, to be the same over time. The second one is energy, and that is the energy that you have as a carer to look after someone with PD. And thirdly, a double-headed double arrow that shows a balance between the needs of the loved one and your needs as a carer, and they too are important. What happens over a 10-year period can be something like this. Oh, something shot past just then. We'll look at that again in a moment. Total time in the day stays the same. There it is. Just come back again. It's your energy zooming off to the local shop to get the daily paper or whatever. I'm all for visual aids, even when they're not necessary. Now then, watch what happens. As the time gradually passes, 2 things happen obviously the total time in the day stays exactly where it is. The amount of energy you have, and particularly if you're in your 70s, say, begins to diminish because the pressures on you get greater and you are being a victim of old Father Time. So the zzz is a technical term for sleeping, and that need for rest and recuperation increases as time goes past. The needs of your loved one increase as the disease becomes more serious, and you time, as it were, gets more and more squeezed. And that continues relentlessly until we get, here we are, there's somebody now going more slowly to buy the daily paper. Right. Now what happens? Watch this. What happens eventually, as happened to me, is that your energy becomes squeezed to the point at which you can no longer cope. Your need for rest and recuperation and whatever becomes greater and greater, and the loved one's needs really explode off the map, and your you time, if you've got the energy to take any benefit from the you time, disappears altogether. At that point, you're told by the social work, the community mental health team, the consultant, the GP, and the rest, as I was, that she or he has to go into a care home, and that is another trauma you have to face. However, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves now. Before I go over to the next slide, you'll see that I've sort of skipped over chapter 2, which is important though, in that it gives an account of our history, my wife and myself, starting off and then experiencing the beginnings of Parkinson's, and then as things go on beyond that. And I thought it was important for you to hear a personal story and see how much your own story slots into it. Right then, where do we go from here? We go back to this thing with the rather blurred B in the middle, and we'll look now at chapters 3 and 4, and at the conflicting and increasing challenges you face as a carer. The first is, I find it difficult to squeeze all that information into one line, but what I'm saying is, on the one hand you're a carer, on the other hand you're a husband or wife in that role, and the two different roles clash with one another and alternate so much. One minute you're wiping their mouth or helping them go to the toilet or whatever, and the next minute you've got their arm round and you're trying to console and comfort them, and that itself increases the number of challenges and difficulties that you face. The second point is, do not be overawed by the fact that you'll be in the presence, or may well be in the presence, of a consultant, or a GP, a community mental health team, social work, a whole pile of people who've spent their lives and their careers working on this, and there's little you in the middle. Can't possibly make a contribution, but you can, and there's a reason why you can. You are not an expert on the medical side of things, but you are an expert in the person that you are caring for. You can add that dimension in what's burrito de board as patient-centered medicine. You can add your own dimension to everything which they have to say. So do not be afraid to pipe up. Do not be afraid to ask what the Scots call the daft laddie question if you don't understand what they're talking about. And do be prepared to play your own role. Another thing creeps into the agenda at this point. You may have found that you were doing a full-time job to begin with, and then you either take retirement early or the time for retirement comes upon you. And that itself is a life-changing situation for you, because your job gives you prestige, it gives you something to do, it puts bread on the table, and then suddenly you drop off the end and you have to cope with being at home all the time, or being not a working person, as it were. In all of this, there is one rule which is extremely important, and this is number 4. The carer must look after themselves. It sounds a little bit, I don't know, it sounds a little bit odd and possibly even plain selfish, but I have seen it in the literature more than once. You must love yourself first and foremost and feel good inside your skin, and if you don't, then nobody else will feel good. You have to be up for it, if you like, and you have to be not in a situation where you're having the self sucked out of you, as it were, because gradually you'll be able to offer less and less to the person you're caring for. It's a weird thing to say, perhaps, but it is absolutely true. Let's do a little bit of a flip of the page, and there we are. And turn our attention to chapters 5 and 6. We start with an item which I don't know, the professionals think is extremely important. I'm very conflicted about the idea of respite. However, the notion behind this is that one or both of you need to take a break from each other every now and then, and that helps you to recharge those famous batteries, as it were. Sometimes the respite is for the person being cared for, and sometimes it's for the carer. It could be one of those day centres, or it could be a fortnight in a care home. My problem with it is that, I don't know, the end of the day, you're going back into the same situation you came out of. But hey, if it works for you, do take up these odd bits of respite. The other problem that I found was that if, as she was given a fortnight in the care home, I spent a fortnight worrying about her, which is not exactly respite for me. And she wasn't too happy there either, anyway. And then there's a difficult role-changing situation which happens at the time at which the loved one goes into a care home. Now, I call this the state of being an absentee carer. It means that suddenly your role has changed. The focus of your intense daily activities has been your loved one. He or she goes into a home, there's a gap. And this is a gap which is going to go on forever, you know. It's not something that we switched on and off. You have to adjust to an entirely different situation. But if you hear anybody say, as Bush, the president of the US, famously said when Saddam Hussein's statue was toppled, "Job done," it ain't a case of job done. You still have the pain and the suffering which goes along with being a carer. And much worse, you find that you are being borne down by what the professionals call, I think it's a very good phrase too, anticipatory grief. In other words, your carer's gone into a home, you know he or she is there for the duration. You can't grieve for them because they are there, but they're also slipping away and perhaps into greater levels of dementia. And this is why it's called anticipatory grief. In other words, instead of having that sudden nasty shock of a close loved one dying, and then the process of grieving and possible slight recovery from that, you find that you're grieving and caring at the same time. And also you still need to be up to how to deal with talking to your carer. More of that later. One of the things that comes with being an absentee carer is that you're going to be, let's take the second one first, you're going to be lonely. You have to fill that gap somehow. If you've got a circle of friends, I got a small circle, and particularly one very good friend. He's always at the end of a line, even though I know he's busy doing his politics and so forth. And that is an important prop. The second one is intimacy. I don't necessarily mean sexual intimacy, although that still can play a role. I mean that for all those years that you've been caring, you have been in constant contact, physical and close, the daily contact with somebody, talking to them, knowing who them and their foibles, they know you and your foibles and so forth. And then all of a sudden that's cut off as well. So it's a double whammy, if you like. And then all kinds of good advice starts pouring upon you. And one of the best or worst of all the bits of advice is the one is, should you move house? In other words, the nest which you have built for yourself and your loved one, possibly with children as well, of course, is regarded as being, quote, too big for you. So should you move? Here comes a useless visual aid. There's a series of houses and there's somebody moving house. But just take a moment to think about this. It sounds as though it might be a good idea, but is it really? The house itself is part of that relationship. The pictures on the walls, the dent where somebody fell over and tripped on the floor or whatever. All those little memories of pictures and books and DVDs and everything else. It all accumulates into an environment that wraps around you like a warm blanket. And if you move house, let's be sensible and downsize. If you move house, you'll find yourself in an alien environment and having to cope with that on top of everything else. I go into greater detail in the book about that subject, and I do recommend that you beg, steal or borrow a copy, even if you just want to read that bit. Let's turn the page again and have a look. As you can see, chapter 7 to the end. There will be a number of very unpleasant bumps in the road with Parkinson's, which you have to be on the lookout for. Your loved one may have a psychotic fit. In my case, she had a really bad psychosis, losing contact with reality, shouting and screaming, and all the ugly details are in the book. And the other, and then there is a variation on a psychosis caused by a mental build-up. It's called a UTI, a urinary tract infection, which Parkinson's sufferers are inclined to fall victim to, and that's a different sort of psychosis, not so severe perhaps, and it can be cured with antibiotics. So there are lots of other bumps in the road, if you like to call them such, which you have to put up with along the way. Another general point I'd like to make is, here is a nice paradox, number 2. The worse you feel, the better you are. Somebody said to me, oh gosh, was it a social worker? Many other husbands, she said, would have given up ages ago. And I thought, really? It's not that I'm not many other husbands, it's that I think anyone who cares deeply about somebody and sticks with it and looks after them is bound to feel really bad. And the paradox is that if you feel absolutely terrible about him or her going into a home, that shows just what a grand person that you have been, and a credit to you for looking after your loved one through thick and thin. And now here's a tough one. Number 3. Particularly when or if your loved one goes into a home, there's a huge gap, a yawning void in you. You must too have a life. You must rebuild parts of yourself. I know it's difficult, and particularly for me, I'm 80 something, and if somebody said, well, you start all over, I haven't got much time to start all over. I'll be stopped by the grim reaper before I could get going. But it is vitally important. You can't just let yourself rot on the vine, as it were. And now a tricky one, because so many people say, well, all you have to do really is cherish the past and think of those good times together. And I thought about that. It's a matter of perspective. It's a matter of one thing overlaying another as well. It's all very well saying cherish those good times, but those good times, in many cases, are a decade and more away. And that decade has been a decade of deterioration and of caring and of increasing suffering and heaven knows what. And the past, as somebody once said, is a far country. And when those memories are somewhat dimmed, I know how, very powerful, falling in love and all this sort of thing and building a home together, and yet it seems to be a long way away. I'm very conflicted about this cherishing the past business, as you can gather. Now then, they thought it was all over, but it's not over yet, to coin a phrase. I've got some bits and pieces here which I haven't been able to squeeze into the narrative so far, but here are some practical bits and pieces. One of them is power of attorney, and the second is drawing up a will. These practical issues are extremely important. As soon as somebody is diagnosed, while they are still in good mental health, you should see a solicitor and draw up mutual powers of attorney, because you don't know, it might be you who overtakes and gets into a worse state further down the line. And the power of attorney is extremely valuable and important. I know it's I was power of attorney for my mother, and the bureaucracy involved was unbelievable. But it does allow a smooth transition to you looking after the loved one, particularly with their financial affairs, the impact on personal independence payments, the business of paying for the home and how much you have to, or it just goes on forever. Those two things are vital. If you have neither of them, you are in trouble, I promise you. And then a repetition of this business of moving house. I just put that there as a sort of typical of the some of the kind of practical issues that you'll be faced with, more on a perhaps financial level than on any other level. And then finally, a little question for you, and I do mean finally. Should you be an optimist or a pessimist? Answer is neither. An optimist is bound to be found disappointed. At the end of the day, in the present state of the art, there is no cure. A pessimist, as somebody once snidely said, at least they're never disappointed. But I don't think you should be either of those two. I think you should be what I call a realist. Life is like that. Life can be a four-letter word, if you see what I mean. And you have to face up to that fact. And you can't smooth over it. You can't pretend that it's a little house on the prairie and all is well. You have to face up to the facts. And if you do that, I think your chances of surviving and of building something of a life for yourself are vastly improved. Finally, you'll be pleased to hear, that's what the covers of the book look like, and you see the prices are more or less giveaway. Please beg, borrow, buy, go on Amazon and get a copy, put it in your Kindle, whatever, and you'll know that the money goes to a good cause. And I hope that what I have to say will be of some help to you. And if you've been watching and listening to this introduction to the book, thank you very much for your time, and all the best to you in what can be a very uncertain and challenging future.